Welcome to Reach, your platform to connect with other executive assistants and acquire game-changing knowledge and perspective. Reach is designed to inspire your workday, guide you through pivotal moments in your career, and transform you into the executive assistant you've always wanted to be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reach. This is your host, Jessica Van. I'm the founder and CEO of Maven Recruiting Group. And today I have Kris with us. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you.
Great to have you with us.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. So Kris Goodsall, I want to make sure I get all of it correctly. Kris is the founder and CEO of Devon Collaborations. And throughout her career, Kris has supported some of the most iconic and legendary figures in Silicon Valley. High-profile leaders such as Ev Williams, such as Stuart Butterfield, Ev Williams, of course, of Twitter, and then Stuart, of course, who founded and was the CEO of Slack. And Kris has guided them through critical transitions in their careers and in their companies, from product creator to actually company leader. At Slack, you played a central role in building out the operational processes that ultimately helped the company scale globally. And you served as chief of staff through Slack's acquisition by Salesforce, which was a whopping $27.7 billion acquisition. Today, Kris partners with CEOs of growth stage companies and leaders who have mastered building a product, but who are now facing the challenge of what it means to actually build, run, and scale a business, which, as you know extremely well, are two very, very different things. So drawing on her own path from executive assistant to chief of staff to now executive coach, you help founders uncover their blind spots and figure out how to strengthen leadership teams and navigate pivotal decision making. So really an honor to have you here. I love just the biography of what you've done and your evolution. So really excited for you to share your insights with us, to share a little bit more of your career with us today. So first question, Devon, is that from the French word for become?
Yes.
Is that
yes,
okay?
You got it. You passed your French test today.
Great. And I don't speak French, but I looked it up. I was like, that would track, because this whole idea of evolution and becoming and evolving.
And between my roles at Twitter and Slack, I took a year. I moved to Paris and I learned French. So I was trying to tie a bit of that experience into what I'm doing now.
Nice. Yeah. Do most people know that that's what that is, or?
No, and it's probably not the greatest branding move because no one knows how to spell it either. But, what's done is done.
What's done is done. It's too late to rework it, right?
Yeah.
That's great. Very good. So leading into this discussion, I'd love to learn a little bit more about this really phenomenal career journey that you've had. Can you tell us about how you got your start in executive support, and how did you end up becoming a chief of staff and eventually launching Devon?
Well, I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I watched all the orchards turn into offices, and I worked my way through college doing bookkeeping. I'd studied to be a teacher, but when I got out of college, I ended up in a role in finance at Logitech, which, they make the peripherals, most old monitors, and when you go to the airport and you look at the camera, that's a Logitech camera. I loved Excel, and I had a great mentor in my boss, and I'd been there for a few years. And then I had a friend who was supporting the CTO at Yahoo, and there was a role that opened up for the president at that time, and she said, "You should apply for this. You would be great." I was like, I don't know, working with C-levels. Normally I have a spreadsheet that the C-level sees eventually, but I didn't ever really interact with them. But the woman who I was applying to work for had been previously the CFO. She had worked in finance in New York and just was a very impressive individual, Sue Decker. And I was like, wow, if I could have the opportunity to just even, read her memos, like what a gift that would be. So I was like, all right, let's go, I'll apply. And she, at that time, and it was pretty much a thing well known at Yahoo for the C-suite, they had this EA test, and I'm sure you've seen some version of something like this with different people.
I administered that EA test. Yes.
Okay. So I was terrified, but I was like, here it goes. And they came back and said, out of all these experienced EAs, like, you knocked it out of the park with the test. Like, she wants to talk to you. And it was just a fit. And I feel really fortunate. And also just reminds me that so much of these roles and how you get into them is about who you know, and it's about trust. The fact that I was referred by someone. So from there, I was there for a few years, and then I ended up at Twitter. Once again, through someone I knew, my recruiter at Yahoo moved to Twitter. And, it was there that I really had the opportunity to obviously be in a high growth environment, learn more about the business. And I was hired to work for the CEO, Evan Williams, at the time. And he was the type of executive, we'd be in a meeting and they'd be discussing something and he'd say, hey, Kris, what do you think about this? And I was like, what? Recently was telling him like what a big impact that made on me and made on my career, to realize that, I do have a voice in these situations. I have opinions to share. I have a perspective that no one else in the room has. And so I was at Twitter for 4 years. It's quite the ride in many different ways. And then after I left Twitter, I, like I said, studied French. And I said, there's no way I'm moving back to San Francisco. I want to go to New York. I want to go to Copenhagen, anywhere but San Francisco. I grew up there. It's so boring. But I said the only way that I would move back is if Slack offered me a job, because I had used the tool when it first came out. It was being used as a Twitter alumni, Slack. And I was like, whoa, this is going to change everything. And so I was honestly a little bit annoyed when I got a call from my friend who was a recruiter at Slack saying like, hey, like, we're looking for someone. And I was like, no, I don't want to go back. But it was one of the greatest things that ever happened. They were actually hiring for an EA role, and I wanted a chief of staff role. And there was actually a chief of staff at the time, and I met with her, and she's like, this is not for me. I'm moving out of this role. There's plenty of room for growth here. And I was like, all right, so I'll trust in myself that I can prove myself, make it happen. And sure enough, I was in the role for a few months, and the CEO, Stuart, promoted me to chief of staff. And that was just quite a wild ride on its own, which we can go into more. But after being there for 4.5-5 years, it was time to transition to something else. And I thought about the parts of my role that I enjoyed the most. And that was working with the humans, making a team see each other and work towards a common goal, and even more specifically, helping these individuals that I had come to know very closely as, my coworkers and my boss and friends, and also just living in San Francisco, you meet so many people that are going through these transitions. And if I was like, if I can help the good guys with that transition, then I can, that is a point of impact for me that I wouldn't have in any other way. So I've been able to do that now for almost 5 years, and I just feel so fortunate to work with the people that I work with.
That's incredible. I mean, the fact that you had not one, not two, but 3 of the most flagship companies under your belt, working at the level that you have and with the figures that you have. It also, we've had a number of guests on our program over the last 6 years, but this theme of manifestation seems to come up quite a bit. And it's interesting to me because I really think it kind of underscores this idea that you sort of conjure whatever it is into your life. I mean, here you were happily frolicking about, Europe and Copenhagen, probably eating at Noma or whatever.
I wish I could get a reservation.
Darn it. And then you get that call, and it's just so interesting to me because you literally said the only way I would leave this life is for that. Yeah, it's kind of fascinating.
I do feel super fortunate.
So when your role shifted, working for Stewart from executive assistant to chief of staff, what did that onslaught of kind of new responsibilities and new scope, what did that look like?
To be honest, it was a lot of what I was doing before, just with more space to do it. By being able to hire an EA, and then eventually Stewart said, I want you doing more of the things that you're good at. I want you to have an assistant. So then I had an assistant. So I would say it was, that's not really answering your question, but it was continued looking towards the future, continued understanding of what is coming, putting myself in my executive's position. Like, what is this person going to need in the next hour, in the next week, in the next month? What energizes him? And then also expanding that to the team, which is why I love the chief of staff role, because I had the freedom to be able to have the time to understand other teams more, and provide more of a valuable impact.
Where do you feel most comfortable? And I guess I'm approaching that question from the perspective of, I think a lot of executive assistants identify with being more behind the scenes as opposed to front and center. But you're an interesting data point in that you really have done both, and you've straddled the behind the scenes. Even from the very beginning of your career, as you talked about, you were mostly behind the scenes, behind the spreadsheets, to then Ev, calling on you in these meetings and in these rooms that were occupied with very accomplished, I can imagine, very intelligent individuals, and you being asked to step up to the plate. That's about as front and center as you can imagine. So I'm curious, where are you most comfortable, and how have you managed to sort of navigate that flip?
Well, it is a continual journey. First, I feel that I can observe more. Obviously, when I'm not front and center, my brain isn't engaged in projecting, it's engaged in receiving. I can be collecting data on who seems burnt out, who is disengaged, who's distracted, and how can I help? And that's much easier to do behind the scenes. Secondly, I had an extremely religious upbringing. When I say extremely religious, I mean no rock and roll, no dancing, no secular movies. All of the women were wearing long skirts. You didn't have any friends outside of our small church. And also as women, we were not welcome to share our ideas in group settings. As a woman, the only change that you could make was from behind the scenes. And so I had been programmed to, that's not my role. And I had also just never had the experience. So you can see it was a really challenge for me to transition to being front and center. And the feedback that I most consistently got was, your ideas are great, but you're not sharing them in like our executive meetings or in large group settings. Instead I would slack my idea to someone like, here, you should say this. And some people love that. It's like, great, I got it. Or I would wait for smaller groups, wait for one-on-ones. And, we know now more and more that the body keeps score. And so much of that I didn't realize was psychological. And then it was also physical, the manifestation of, I'm not supposed to be doing this, like feeling anxiety. And that's when I, eventually learned about beta blockers. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a tool that I heard about from a comms consultant, as it's popular with a lot of newscasters. And basically what it does is it essentially dampens the adrenaline surge that some people feel when they experience what feels like fight or flight. Like your heart starts pounding, you can't think as clearly, you're a little bit frozen. And what this does is just sort of dampens all that. You feel like your mind is much more clear. And I wish I had known about this much earlier on, but then that wasn't my path, and I learned other things instead. And I guess the thing that I would want to enforce to anyone is that, to be patient with yourself, and to not, we take time to change, we take time to evolve. And I think not talking down to yourself, and instead seeking out support, whether it's, a coach, a therapist, friends that you really admire. My therapist was always telling me to go to a Toastmasters class, and I was like, no way in hell I'm doing that. But, whatever it is that will eventually work for you, I just say be patient. and don't beat yourself up.
Right. And it also seems to like it's similarly important to align yourself with leaders who are willing to recognize you and see you as whole and as having something to offer and to bring. And that is not always the case. You know, especially as we both know and as our listeners know, oftentimes there can be some sort of unwarranted stigmatizing of the EA role and kind of a diluting and dumbing down of what EAs are capable of doing. And it's really sad. It continues to break my heart, honestly, because I see the immense potential. So I think there's also that point of choosing people who want to see you in that way and want to view you as inherently capable of great things.
I'd like to say that I chose these people. There's this founder mode that's being talked a lot about in Silicon Valley, and in general, when you look at success, and a lot of it is luck. I was in the right time at the right place, but also there were circumstances where I thought, this doesn't feel good to me. And I'm sure you would know more than others that there are a lot of roles all the time for someone that's an amazing EA. And if something doesn't feel right for you, you don't have to stay. It's like a relationship. It's okay to break it off, move on. Obviously, you want to make sure that your career path looks a certain way and you can get advice on that. But, you've got one life. I think finding the people who are willing to take a chance on you, to believe in you and support you is worth that moment of being uncomfortable.
And you have the power of choice, especially in the Bay Area. I think that there's no shortage of opportunity. So what's your perspective on executive assistants who view this role as a stepping stone versus those who choose to build a long-term career within the EA role? And of course, we meet all types, right? And we meet both types. So are there any perceptible differences that you can notice or identify between the career EAs versus the EAs who are kind of journeying from that role?
Well, I'd say that there are obviously those who leave business school and they go right into an assistant role. And those are clearly people that are, seeing it as a stepping stone. But I couldn't say I could clearly identify the differences because the skill sets are so similar. And also because people change, and what brings you joy and fulfillment at one stage may be insufficient in another. And I think that can go both ways, whether it's wanting more responsibility and being more curious about, what's actually making the business go, or whether you are just finding complete joy and satisfaction and creating, the time boxes that help make the company run. And perhaps you want to keep a very clean schedule so that you are available for, families or other things. I'm taking a science class right now, and the role that I've chosen for myself is so that I can do other things. So I think it's always about who you are in that moment, and it's about individual fulfillment. Aristotle said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And then later, Emerson said, to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. And I think there's often pressure to evolve into a new role. But if you love what you do, what a gift. Some people search for that their whole lives and never get it.
Career.
Yeah. And if you're feeling gratified by the work that you are doing as an EA, we need you. I think finding fulfillment and satisfaction and being comfortable with that and confident in it is a major key, not only for yourself, but also for the work that you can provide, the support that you can provide to the system that you're working inside of. And I'd say for even those that view this role as a stepping stone, you'll get the most out of it if you give 110% into the role that you've been hired to do. I feel like to prove yourself to be a subject matter expert in what you're doing is the way to get to where you want to go next. At Yahoo, I was the first person in, I was the last person to leave. And it wasn't until I had made make sure everything was buttoned up to the best of my ability. Obviously, we always miss things. Was I reading the presentations or the documents, or asking the chief of staff sort of clarifying questions?
Right.
It's a fine balance, because especially as an EA, you can be so busy doing so much. But I think that, just want to make the point that it's obvious when you're viewing it as a stepping stone. And I think some people miss out on opportunities because they're not focused on giving it all in the role that they have.
Yeah. Well, and what you just shared, I think, corroborates what we see, which is that most of these opportunities for growth come as a result of outperforming in the role that you're hired for. And I mean, that was self-evident as well in your own career path, right? I mean, you were hired as the EA at Slack, but they quickly promoted you, right? It was evident that that's where you needed to be. And so I think that again, really underscores your point about giving 110% in the role that you're hired for. And that when you do that, and only when you do that, do other things sometimes materialize. And I think too, like what you said about, if you love being an EA and that's your jam, then jam on it and keep doing it. I mean, I would argue that the majority of executives would love for that to be the case. I think that, yes, there are the exceptional leaders that want to kind of help you evolve and grow and morph and support your trajectory. But for the most part, they would love for you to stay. Because if you're really great at being their EA, they don't want to rock that boat. And so there's a very strong case for, being great at what you do and being satisfied. If you are satisfied, that's not a thing to lament. That's a thing to celebrate, because it works for everybody.
And, I've seen executives who feel that way about their EAs, and a good executive will not necessarily discourage you from moving on, but they will actively look to reward you and compensate you to express their appreciation.
To stay put.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Please don't go. What do you need?
Please don't
How can
go.
Can I get you a coffee? Like, I've seen that with executives. Like, you do you, and I'll go get you lunch.
Right.
You want to work with someone like that, and they exist. They're out there.
And it's a very, as you know, it's a very painful role to have to re-ramp,
Yeah.
Because once you get into that lockstep, it's so intimate, and intimacy takes a very long time to build, as does trust, as does knowing, all of those things, Yeah. So it's particularly unsettling when there's transition in that role.
Yep. You see some of these executives, I think Jerry Yang is still working with the person that he was working with when I was at Yahoo almost 20 years ago. And you know that he's taking care of her. Mm-hmm. She's not going anywhere.
Mm-mm. We hear that a lot. So at Slack, you were involved in discussions about potentially rebranding the support role from executive assistant to executive business partner. Can you share how that whole conversation evolved internally? And also, what do you see as the significance of carrying an executive business partner title versus an executive assistant title?
So at Slack, we were constantly thinking about the way that work was changing, obviously, because we were enacting that.
At the forefront, yep.
Yeah, it was wild. So it was always top of mind. And, the conversation was really prevalent about how we have different tools available to us today. So a day-to-day in the life of any role looks completely different than it did, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And that's especially true for EAs. When my mom was a secretary, the former, the original, in the mid 80s, she was answering phones. She was printing and filing memos. She was making binders, and she got so excited when they got a fax machine or sending faxes, and she was very busy doing all of those things, and all of those things are automated today. You don't have, those things take less than a second. So that means that the role has changed. So you can
Right.
do more. And so I had seen that Google had changed the title. And I don't know if they have what they do exactly. I haven't, not up on the latest, but I saw that they had changed from EA to executive business partner. And I was like, well, that really reflected more of like what I was doing in that role. And so I'm going to work to bring that to Slack. I'm chief of staff. I'm going to make things happen for the EAs. And it took quite a while for me to campaign, to make a case. One of the executives that I was talking about before, who loved his EA, didn't want her to go anywhere. He's a bit more old school, and he's like, no, she's an executive assistant. That is her job. That is her title. And I made my case, and finally I got approval to make this change. And I gathered all the C-level EAs together, and I had an announcement, where this is going to happen. And I was shocked because they weren't happy.
Oh, interesting.
And a large amount of the C-level EAs are the EAs that we've been talking about, that are great at what they do, have such pride in their role, and they're like, no, I'm an EA. I'm proud to be an EA. And I was really taken aback, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to force this on you. Like, let's take a vote. And
Right.
overwhelmingly, they wanted to stick with EAs. And I will say at Slack, there was a very good transition to from EA to, it wouldn't be a program manager or a chief of staff. We had a lot of different chief of staff throughout the organization. So I think that those people who wanted to transition to something could see those opportunities. But it was a really interesting experience for me to have, because, we talked about knowing yourself, but that doesn't mean everyone else feels the same way that you do about things. Everyone has a different perspective. Everyone has different desires. And that was one of the many lessons I learned in my role as chief of staff, is I need to talk to people before I go out. And the one thing, that I try to teach my CEOs is, you think you know best, and you probably do in most cases, but, do the work, or have someone do the work for you to get information, talk to people. So that was a great learning for me.
Yeah, that's a really excellent example. Pulsing your audience, not making assumptions, right? Which I think that's a really nice example too, because I think that so often that's exactly what we do is we make assumptions, we project our own thoughts into things. We have siloed information. So very interesting.
Yeah.
And
learning.
yet still learning, right? And I think
Yep.
that's great. And it's funny too, because I can think of a lot of organizations that would have loved that and would have been like, yes, power to the people, thanks for taking up this mantle for us. But you have to know your audience.
Yeah. And it was a real struggle for me not to force that on them.
Yeah, right.
But it's like, okay, I have to go and admit to those executives that I was wrong, that we're reversing all of this. And that's fine. It was a humbling and edifying experience in a way.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for that. That's very revealing. I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, right? Because it kind of was, right? But what a great example for all of us. So thank you for vulnerably sharing that. I appreciate that.
Of course.
So you worked, as we've talked about, in the office of the CEO at Yahoo. You worked at Twitter, and you later served as chief of staff at Slack, where you helped scale teams and partnered closely with leaders across the org. So how did those experiences and the time you spent, in the room, so to speak, observing these executives and their team dynamics and the way that they approach decision making, how did all of that shape your approach to how you coach growth stage CEOs today?
Well, when you sit that close to leaders and you're in all of the meetings and behind the scenes and in front of everyone, all hands, you see all the magic and you also see the mess. What stuck with me is, of course, how quickly the job changes, but also how each situation is so unique. And, there isn't a one size fits all solution to every problem. And every executive is so different. Their teams are so different. The market is constantly changing, as we're seeing now today more than ever. And those experiences taught me that my job as a coach or consulting, I kind of call it collaborating, because I'm not there to tell them, this is the best way. I'm not there to hand them an answer. I think it's my job to get to know them, to understand them, what motivates them, and their teams, and what their team's strengths are, who can fulfill a role in this way and who can fill a role in this other way, and teach them to build systems specific to them and their environment so the company can keep scaling. And so the CEOs aren't in those roles where they're hovering over every pixel. But I think the key to making them feel comfortable of stepping out of that is to have systems set up. And I'm a firm believer in EAs being the first line of being able to set those up. But I think the key learning for me is just that everyone is so different. And, there are all these different playbooks, and I had the opportunity to work with a lot of executive coaches, and hire them and work with them. I had one myself, and I saw this sort of gap in that, someone who had been there before, but also someone who's not going to say it's my way or the highway. Only, this is the way to do it, and this is the only thing that works. And I feel that's a trap that I see CEOs, and more so that founder CEOs get into, is that like, well, this guy did it this way, this is the only way to do it. It's like, well, your team is completely different, your company is completely different, your market is completely different. Like, yes, take the gems, but then figure out how they fit inside of your world.
Yeah. And even just the market conditions, you might have everything the same, which you'll never have, but the point is that what was relevant in 2000 or 2001 may not apply in 2025, right?
Yep.
So there's just a whole myriad of things. Are there any examples that come to mind, of course, that you're at liberty to share with us, which I understand that there may be limitations there, but like, are there any examples of just incredible kind of crisp decision-making, leadership, consensus that come to mind where you go, God, like that was leadership at the highest level?
It's so hard because there are so many examples and none of them are crisp. I would say the best leaders have, and this may sound obvious, but it's instilled in them. Even though my role is to help people change and adapt, like you sort of have it or you don't. In some ways, there's like this gut that you have. And when I think about moments where I saw a leader make the kind of decisions you're talking about, it's more about making the decision at the right time, not sitting on it for too long. I think there's a Harvard Business study that says it's not about necessarily which decision you made, but that you made it and that you move forward. And so I think it's more about having a trust in yourself and going with it. Because if you sit around and debate endlessly and read a million memos, so I do love a memo meeting. What's going to happen is there's going to be some startup that's way faster than you, and they're going to come out with the version of the product that you've been talking about for months. So I think it's a matter of trusting yourself and taking action.
Which is what you opened our conversation with, didn't you say? Was it Aristotle that you said? Yeah. About knowing yourself. Yeah. And this concept of trustworthiness, not as it applies to others. Are you trustworthy? But as it applies to yourself. Do you trust yourself? Are you trustworthy?
Right. And great EAs have to do that all day long, right? They're making those split-second decisions. And I think that's one of the reasons that role can be so addictive, because you're just like, go, decision. It's fun. It's fascinating.
Yeah. It's a rush. It's adrenaline. So to share more context on the CEOs that you work with now, like what stage of growth or development are they typically? What kind of revenue size, funding level, pre-revenue?
Yeah, it depends. Typically it's at the stage, As we know, the funding levels can vary widely. I stopped, kind of defining it as a certain raise or round, but it's more or less when you reach that inflection point when the CEO has to stop building a product, but start building a company, start building a business. And, it's hard. Change is hard. Growing pains are hard. And if I can help them, and in some ways I'm like, okay, let's say I know nothing. At the very least, I've seen a lot, not only in the roles that I've been in, but also in the last 5 years. So I think my target is definitely, I love working with founder CEOs going through that inflection point, just because it is such a pivotal moment for the company and for themselves personally. It's just a joy to see them come out on the other side of it, wherever they end up, which could be many different places.
Right. So then for you, is growth stage the stage when the product is more or less defined, coherent, but now, like you said, okay, now we actually have to build a company around this product to support this product and grow it?
Yeah, typically it's a CEO who has been tasked with, going from 300 to 1,500 in 2 years, or, and it's like, whoa. And, this rapid growth stage has always been described as a rocket ship. And my husband is an astrophysicist, and he's got this great mug from NASA that says, it's got all these math formulas on it, and it says it is rocket science. But I've had the unique opportunity of getting to hear about rockets and watching lots of documentaries and every single sci-fi movie that's ever had a rocket in it going towards space. And it's going fast. Things are flying by. It's like that green flash at sunset. When the sun rays are bent, and you barely, it's gone before you've noticed it. Before you've noticed it, almost. Yeah, it's a fraction of a second, and that's the truth in this stage. Everything is happening so quickly that it's really difficult for the human brain to step back, take a look at the big picture, and realize what's going on, and it can be quite destabilizing. So we're creatures of habits for a reason. And so these CEOs that I'm typically working with, they've lost maybe their work-life balances off. Maybe they haven't been able to spend time with their family. They haven't been able to spend time with their friends. And when they do spend time with their friends aren't really empathetic towards their situation. And it can be really lonely. So I think being able to walk someone through that path and understand them in the way that I've seen other people go through, and how I've seen really wonderful people cope and move on to the next step.
Yeah, and come out the other side. Yeah. So what do you see as, you touched on this a little bit, but, what are some of the challenges that you routinely see in going from product builder to company leader? And I guess the second part of that is, you mentioned something is typically suffering, whether it's their bandwidth, their mental load, their work-life balance, their interpersonal relationships, the company itself, something is amiss. So second part of the question is, how do you see the role of executive assistants in helping to ameliorate whatever dynamic is at play? I'd
say, to your first question, what are these challenges? I imagine you hear them all the time when someone's calling you and say, hey, this is happening. These CEOs have nonstop demand for their time. They're sorting through information overload. They're newly learning the art of delegation. They're trying to get the right talent on board and figure out how much to pay them when they've never even really seen what those roles even look like. And somehow, in all of that, they're trying to keep an eye on their company culture, which can drip dramatically during this stage. And sometimes the people that you hire at this stage do not like working at that stage. So it's a lot. And I think that's where an EA, especially one who's been in another company, can come in and have such a dramatic effect. I have seen it time and time again. The first way in which they can help is very obvious, but I can't skip it, and that's time management. As the EA, you're entrusted with the most valuable resource at the company, and that's very, I was kind of like, oh, wow. Like, when you really take that in, you are the CEO of their calendar. And it is your number one responsibility to constantly be taking a step back. Even though you're getting all those adrenaline hits by, solving all the little problems, you got to step back, take a breath, look at the big picture, and ensure that the CEO's time is reflecting the company's priorities, and make sure that you are in sync with that individual. When I worked at Twitter, I worked a lot with our COO at the time, Adam Bain. And I would joke to people that if Adam woke up in the morning and his calendar completely changed and it said, "You're going to Singapore," he would have shown up at the office with a bag packed and ready to go. Just because, he had that trust in what was, in the calendar. Though ideally a great EA would say, "You're going to Singapore. You have, 2 black tie events. It's going to be hot and muggy. Bring your linens." It's like all those details. But I use that blind trust example of the complete faith that a successful EA and their executives should have in each other. And like you said, it takes time. I can give you many examples of missteps I made when I've started working for someone else, and like everything that worked for this person does not work for that person.
Does not work for them. Yep.
So it's I always would when I would onboard executives that weren't used to working with, a real deal EA, I would just tell them, give them everything, like surrender, and then you will get so much back in return. And there are many other ways that an EA can help at this. And it's sort of those, almost executive business partner type of responsibilities, or, junior chief of staff. There's things like, I could go on and on, but, one example I think of is spotting support. If you're in a meeting and you're taking notes and, there's someone new in the meeting, and normally they're not in the meeting, but you realize, oh, the CEO really liked everything they're saying and they made this meeting way better. Something like that can go unnoticed by other people in the room because they're so engaged in the meeting, which is where they should be. But you have the opportunity to observe these dynamics, and you can say, "Hey, I noticed Noah had some really great ideas in that product meeting. Should we invite him to similar conversations?" And you'll hear, "Yeah, that's a great idea." And then that's a win-win for everybody, and you're spotting rising talent in the company, and you're giving your CEO a bit of relief. He's like, "Oh, I don't have to be the smartest person in the room," even though it's a challenge to walk through that process as well. And then, we talked about setting up different systems of inside the company. So think about structuring the content. How does my executive best receive information? And, if he's just going to be playing a game on his phone every time that a PowerPoint pops up, from now on, no PowerPoints, and you can help in a way, and your executive may not even realize it. I coach a lot of chief of staffs and a lot of chief of staffs with their CEOs. And I'm always telling the chief of staff, "You're doing a great job. You're killing it." Because in that role, and in the EA role also, the greatest things you do will likely never be seen.
Right.
And you're not going to stop the room to tell everybody, "I did this thing, and I'm seeing these meetings have so much more success now because of the way I restructured them, because of who I invite now." So it can be a little bit demoralizing, but I think you can go home at night and know that you added value to the company. I think sometimes I made a misstep in not, keeping track of those things and just mentioning them occasionally. And that's something I coach people on now. But there are so many different things. And I think, once again, trust your gut, use the experience that you have, create systems, build structure, and look for little ways that you can help. And it's always, everybody's going to have great ideas that I'll never think of as well. So it's what is going to work in your situation?
Yeah. And pay attention.
Yeah.
That's a lot of what I'm hearing. So it sounds like you are a strong advocate of executive assistants being in the room and being in meetings, which I know sometimes I get resistance from clients about that, or about similarly, being executive assistants being in the inbox of the people that they support. I mean, I'm kind of extrapolating, but I'm guessing that you feel pretty strongly that they need to be in both of those things. What are your thoughts?
I mean, why hire a horse and like never, that's a
Never
really
put a
poor
saddle on
example.
it or whatever.
Yeah.
I get where you're going. Yeah.
But that's I said when I coached these individuals, I said just turn it over, surrender. You will get so much more because that person doesn't have the context. How can they decide who should get this slot when you're at your best for the day if they don't understand who energizes you, who drains you, and what are the priorities right now, and how are they changing on a moment's notice, so that when someone slacks you or comes up to your desk and says, I need 5 minutes, and as the EA, it's your job to say no, and you'll be able to understand the difference between, yes, you do need those 5 minutes. Go in there right now. I'll delay his next meeting. Like, no problem. And the executive is never going to have the time to relay all of that. And he's also not good. He or she is not going to.
Yeah.
No, because they're focused on other things. Partnership can only happen when there's that trust, and it goes both ways. I really don't understand why we would withhold information.
Yeah.
Like, it's known in any situation, in relationships, in government, like the more communication, the more openness we have, the better we can all understand each other, the better your EA can make decisions for you and be that right hand. I mean, I could go on all day.
I agree. And it takes so much more effort to communicate things that they didn't get to experience firsthand. And to your point, they're just simply not going to. They don't have the time. They don't have the intention or ability to do that. So therefore, you're cutting off a huge access point for context and information. And it's almost like you think about it in terms of like raising a family or whatever. Like, think about what your children observe through osmosis at the dinner table. Like, that's their biggest learning environment, right? It's just the fact that they're at the table and they're picking up on what you're talking about nutrition or study habits or travel or cultures or how we relate to our brothers and whatever. Like, there's so much knowledge in that osmosis, is everything.
And there's one thing that I will say that Slack really ruined for all the EAs, and I'm so sorry, and I was the first one to experience it, is that anyone in the company can DM your executive and you don't see it. It's not a shared inbox. Right. And it used to drive me crazy because I had all these previous systems, I was able to help control the flood of information so that my executive could focus on the thing that was the priority. Stuart is Canadian. He's so nice. He's not going to say no to any, he's like, yeah, of course I want to help that guy. And I think in that situation, for example, it was about having a conversation with him and, can you trust me? And then also establishing a system. So, for example, we would have a channel that was the CEO, Stuart, me as chief of staff, and a direct report of his and both of their executives. And that's where a lot of obviously they had their one-on-one conversations, but they would have a lot of conversation in those channels so that everyone could be looped in into what was going on. And because Slack, the whole perspective in building this was for openness, and we would occasionally there's a report you can run in Slack as to how many people are using private channels versus open channels. Every executive that excelled at what they did always added their EA to every channel that they were in and would add them to conversations. And so I just do have to apologize to all the EAs out there about what we did with Slack, but there are systems, and I'm always happy to share those with anyone.
What about executives who have chiefs of staff, which is a model that we see more and more and more, right? Executive, chief of staff, EA, this kind of triad, right? In cases like that, sometimes I get pushed back. Well, you know what? Why would my EA need to be in the meeting? Because my chief of staff's in the meeting. What are your thoughts? The
EA, as we talked about, is, though they're endorphin hits, it's still work. You're constantly responding to things. You've got a customer request. You need to get back to them. There's go on and on why the EA needs to be engaged in their work. But also, I think being, having that context and taking the notes. And as the chief of staff, at first I was taking the notes and I realized, I'm not able to pay attention and be present. My feedback was, you're not speaking up. Like, there's no way I can take notes. And I'm sorry, maybe some other people can do it really well, but, I've yet to see anyone,
Right.
It's impossible for me to be fully present in that meeting as chief of staff and take excellent notes. I can take notes for the things that I'm responsible for, but other people, and we had a fantastic EA, Claire Bergman, for Steward, and she took better notes that I did that I could as chief of staff, because I was worried about different things, and I'm curious now with AI, and I see there's AI notes, and I've had one of my CEOs said to me recently, well, I don't need my EA in the meeting anymore because we have the AI note taker. And, I've yet to experience that myself. I want to test it out, but I always keep my conversations private and don't record anything. There's still the human awareness of being in the room, understanding the context, understanding how people work together, how they communicate, so that when that EA needs to get something from that other executive, he or she knows how to approach them.
100%. Yeah. Well, and that's not saying anything about tonality. The words may all be transcribed in the exact same way, but tonality matters a lot. And to your other point that you mentioned early in our conversation, you were talking about who's engaged, who's not engaged, who's exemplifying symptoms of burnout, who's really in the moment, who's not, right? Like, none of that is reflected in an AI recording.
And if you watch any excellent actor, you notice that most of their communication is nonverbal.
Right.
Because that's how humans are. And They're just things that you can't pick up on. And once again, what's with the withholding of information? Like, how is that benefiting anyone?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, every successful executive I've seen wants their EA to be able to absorb as much as they can while still being able to function in their role successfully.
Yeah. And arguably you've worked for the most successful of them. So I think that's a good cue for people to recognize, right? That being successful in their executive role also means leveraging their EA to the fullest. So, Kris, as you think about the patterns or qualities of executives who are, these product-focused executives who are able to successfully go through this inflection point that you've described, what is it that you see that allows them to navigate this period more successfully from product builder to leader? What are some of those traits or personality components that they have? Yeah,
it's a lot of things, but a few things stick out. And one we sort of talked about, the skill that it takes to build a product isn't the same to build a business. Like, someone could be a beautiful painter and then they decide to run a company teaching people how to paint, and they're so miserable. So, I think, having that ability to adapt, and what's made us as a species successful in any, species that is still alive and functioning on Earth, is the ability over time to adapt. And, I've had a firsthand experience of adaptation from a life where I was steeped in religion, and, now I didn't believe in evolution, and now I'm married to an astrophysicist. So I've gone from one perspective on the world to a complete other, and even moving to France and having to learn a new language. That's why I didn't want to move back to San Francisco, because I I get it already. I know the people. I know how to get around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I think that the people that I've worked with who have successfully adapted feel excited by that change. And, it's terrifying to not feel comfortable, and it's uncomfortable, but they're the type of people that, they're very curious. They love to learn. They're not afraid to misunderstand or not know something. They'll ask questions. They'll surround themselves with, people who have done it before, subject matter experts. So I think that not only the ability to adapt, because we all have to adapt, right? Mm-hmm. It's raining, you gotta adapt. But the excitement to adapt, the ability, and being ready for that challenge, And then the second area I would say is people who are able to find balance. Like we talked about, the rocket ship is going so fast, but the only way you can step outside of your situation and make wise decisions is to pause and, what is it for you? Is it meditating? Is it going on a run? Is it, whatever, if it's binge watching a show, like whatever it is for you, that's going to help you get out of your world and outside of your brain and, micro focus on all these little problems and what is the most important thing? And it's really difficult in these situations because you have so many people in your head. You've got, your original, VCs, you've got the big time investors, you've got every executive with a different agenda that, they want you to do this thing, we want to put money here instead of here. And it can be really overwhelming. And, it's one of the reasons why having an EA and a chief of staff can help you so much so that they can take over a lot of those micro decisions and free your brain up. So I think, being willing to adapt and, one of the keys in that is finding balance. And it's so difficult because everything seems so urgent. And there is always something that you can do that will make a situation better. You can step into a Slack channel, you can join a meeting, and sure, your opinion everybody will be thrilled that you're there and you can make a positive change. But is it the most important thing that you should be doing right now is the question.
Right. On that note, and I'm curious if you've seen this too, because I think we work with many similar clients. I've noticed a huge push and trend toward what I would consider straight shot to burnout. So I've seen a lot of our clients talking about a 6-7 day work week, almost like a badge of honor. We put in 7-hour or 7-day work weeks around here, and people need to be prepared to put in 10, 12 hours, come home, log back on. I mean, I guess what is your thought on that? And again, having been ringside seat with some of the best leaders and most successful leaders we've seen in the last 15 years, is that did they work 7 days a week? Is that what they were doing to achieve the kind of outcomes and outsized results that they achieved?
No. Yeah, I was just talking to my husband last night, and he's looking for something more interesting and challenging than he was in, and so he told me about this role, and yeah, it was 6 days a week, 9 hours a day. And he just laughed. He's like, there's no way they're going to get someone with the experience that I have who would take that role. So will they hire someone? Will someone be willing to do that? Sure. It's that kind of job market. Are you going to get the best person for the job? I'm just going to go ahead and say, no, it's not going to happen, because quality talent finds balance. Quality talent has other interests in life because they are a brain and an individual that has many interests, and all those interests help them be great at what they do and bring value to you. So, it's unnatural. It's infuriating, honestly, to hear. I've seen it so many times, You burn bright, and then your light is out, and then you treat people poorly. You've seen A New Parent, right? The zombies walking down the street. No one's asking them to solve the world's problems because they need a nap.
Because they have spit up on their collar and haven't showered in 4 days. Yeah, exactly.
And also, if you talking about building. Let's just take a look at the world picture. You want we have a nation of children to raise, and you want these valuable individuals who are going to contribute to your company to raise, children that are going to have time with their fathers and be able to understand. And it's very short-sighted, not only to yourself, to your company's future or to your bottom line, but it's short-sighted overall in the community and like our nation and like globally. It's, Silicon Valley has these phases. And there's many different kinds of them. There's like the PR, like tech phase that I love, things are a disaster. And then you're great all of a sudden. The same thing here. These cycles come, and, just use sort of another example that's not directly related, but there's a CEO that I interviewed to work for as his chief of staff, and CEO that everybody would know the name of. And we were talking, we were walking, and he said, the thing I'm not looking for in a chief of staff is a devil's advocate. And like, so you don't want a chief of staff,
So you want me to be your yes woman. Got it. Okay.
There's a lot of pressure. They're very stressed. What I've been talking about mostly is how much I empathize and understand like what the stress feels like. But the only way to come out on the other end is to hire great people, compensate them well, give them space to do their work, give them time to understand what you want and speak openly and communicate, and put your EAs in the meeting.
Yeah, right.
All the things, like, as the only way we can do things, if you're going to send a rocket to Mars, you need a large group of people doing many different things.
You and I speak the same language, and I'm so tired of our culture, the Silicon Valley culture, romanticizing burnout like is hot. It's not. And what happens, and we've done it like against our own advice. Like, we'll advise these CEOs and say, listen, like, it's not sustainable. What you're talking about, maybe we can solve the issue for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. We can find someone who can suck it up and deal with it. But ultimately, everything has a price. And inevitably, we see it. It's like the EA that signed on for the 7 days a week then has a total breakdown after month 5. And then goes like literally just like AWOL, and like doesn't even return calls because now they need to go to a mountaintop and be alone and completely unplug. And it's like, that's not it. And I think that everything that you've shared today underscores that there's some really big work to be done, heavy lifting, long-term challenges. And so having the view of cycling through people in 4 to 5 to 6 month intervals, that doesn't work. You need someone that can endure. And as you said, it's not natural. It's against the natural order. And I really like the point, just to make it really meta, like the point that you brought in about it's not good for our society, for our culture, to have a world of people that are so frayed and so high strung and just ready to flip and not able to be present in other rooms and spaces that need them. It's not good holistically.
Yeah, and if I can just real quickly, like some other examples, when I first started working for Stuart, he was living in Vancouver, so he was always getting on a plane, and I had a briefing book like ready. Here's what you're going to do on the plane, because I want to maximize every minute that you're awake. And he was like, no, I'm not taking that. I was like,
but I got this People magazine I'm looking forward to flipping through.
Yeah, exactly. And in both of the, the high growth startups, and even when I was at Yahoo, there were many weeks where I worked, the hours that these people are talking about, but I did that out of my own desire. And, being inspired by the person that I was working with and the work that we were doing. And it was a choice that I got to make. And how much better is that, any kind of relationship that you're in when someone can choose to give you something versus you demanding it from them.
Yeah, 100%. When a CEO or a founder is unsure about if they're going to continue in their role as the company grows, how do you help them explore their options?
It's so hard because it's their firstborn child. And what I do is I'm able to talk candidly about many different paths and what they look like and how I think perhaps that individual would thrive in any of those paths and what it would take to get there. Because I've seen all of the paths happen, and, you know, especially like founder issues, you know, are very common in most startups. And I think it's more or less about someone being honest with what they, you know, knowing themselves, what they really enjoy. If they are a creator, you know, are they going to love being a public company CEO, where most of their time is spent with customers, investors? They're prepping for that quarterly call, and then everybody's going to criticize the quarterly call and see the employees, you know, aren't happy with what you said at the all hands. And some people thrive in that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people that found companies are just drained by it. And I think, you know, the challenge for those individuals is a lot of them are going to step away, but they still want control, but they can't have control if they step away. And I've seen some people try to, you know, build some sort of system where they are, you know, chairman, and then they're not interested in the company anymore. And everyone at the company is saying like, hey, we're over here, like, we need you. I think it's thinking about, okay, just like a child, when you raise them, what is the best thing for this child now? Not what's best for me. But like, if I really want this thing to succeed, do I want this thing to succeed, or do I just want my kid to live at home and stay with me? You know, which, you know, it's your life. And that's the thing too. I tell CEOs all the time, it's your company. You get to decide whatever you want. Like, you don't have to be a billionaire. Like, you can keep this company small. You can just have a cash cow that you put in like 20 hours a week. That's okay too. You know, it's like there are so many options available to you. And, you know, a lot of the people that I know that have, you know, done all the things, like, they want to get back to work. You know, they want to build something, you know, it's so it's everybody is so different. And I think what I'm able to provide is getting to know a person and then talking through people that I know that are like them. Here's what that looked like. Here's the changes they had to make to become this, you know, public company CEO, or here's what their life looked like afterwards. And then, you know, it's choose your own adventure, and what a great position to even be in. It's, I know firsthand how difficult it is. And it's not easy. I empathize. I don't envy them.
Right. And again, going back to, I'm going to say it again because I think it's such a sage bit of advice, is it all comes back to knowing yourself. And your path is not identical to a different person's path. You know, you have to answer to yourself ultimately, and what feels right to you. Yeah. So how can our listeners connect with you or learn more about working with you and Devenu collaborations?
Yes. Well, only if you can spell Devenu. That's
That's your
barrier.
first order of business. Please don't reach out if you don't know how to spell it.
I was saying you can't reach out if you can't spell it.
Right.
I don't have a large, like I said, I am more of a behind the scenes person. And I have my I've had my social media days in the past, and so I don't publish a lot online, but I do have a website. I have an email. You can reach out to me at Kris, Kris at Devenu, DEVENU .com, and I'm always able and willing to help EAs, founders. It's what I do.
Do you also coach EAs?
I don't coach EAs, not that I wouldn't. It's just that usually they don't have the budget for a coach, or I'm not really I'm in the mindset. What I do, and that's why I kind of call my work a little bit more of consulting, is most of my engagements, not all of them, but most of them, I work with the whole team. So, you know, one of the things that we didn't really touch on, but founder CEOs really don't like to manage. So I play sort of that role for them. A lot of my clients, I'll sit in as a silent partner in the meetings, and, you know, I'll check in with the EA every once in a while and say like, hey, like, how are you doing? You know, here are some ideas of how you can. So I do, as part of my team coaching, work with EAs. Yeah, I feel like if I, especially the chief of staffs that I've worked with, sometimes I'll spend much more time with the chief of staff than I will with the CEO, because I'm like, I'm not here to gatekeep my knowledge. I'm here to teach you to fish. Like we all succeed if you are in there every day, like making things happen, and it's a really rewarding exchange.
Yeah, I love that. Final question. If you could, and be careful because, you can manifest things, right? We've already determined that. So if you could coach anybody, any leader, past or present, who would you love the opportunity to consult?
This was such a hard question. But when I thought about it, I guess it's just very present for the moment on my mind, and it's in the past, so it wouldn't have, I can't manifest the past. I'm working on it though.
Let me know.
I think, Sam Altman took over OpenAI in 2019. Mm-hmm. That was when we were taking Slack public. So there was no way I was leaving, taking that team to what we were doing. But, I've had the unique opportunity to sit front and center for these pivotal moments in communication digitally. So like seeing Twitter explode and social media, and then to a lesser extent, but more so to the everyday person, Slack and how we communicate at work. Mm-hmm. So, obviously I don't need to belabor the point that AI is changing everything. And it's the people that I know that are working in these companies are like, anyone who says they know what's going to happen, nobody knows. And I think just being able to be a part of that, as I have in other roles, to I guess almost selfishly to understand how the decisions are being made and why they're being made. And then on the other hand, how can I support the philosophy of how those decisions were made into the organization and into future decisions, and how can I expand the reach of an individual that is needed. And talk about high growth, fast growth. This is insane what's happening for this company and other companies similar to it. And I think it's really, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to change a lot, whether, in our lifetimes. And I will say, I don't think EAs are being replaced in our lifetimes by AI.
Thank you for saying that. I agree with you, but thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen the products and they're just, for all the reasons that we've just talked about. We don't know what's going to happen. And I think just to be a part of that and to understand it can only help me inform how to act in my life day to day.
So you'd hope to consult Sam or his leadership team, ideally?
Yeah. I've met Sam. We have friends in common.
I'm sure.
If anything, when I meet people like him, I'm just like, I don't need a conversation. Go do your thing, because I understand they're so strapped for time, it's just I support you in what you're doing. Best of luck. What a challenge. What an opportunity. Once in a lifetime.
This was so great. I can't wait to see what sound bites we're gonna pull from this, because there's so many. I have at least 3 or 4 mic drops that I can think of from this conversation. So thank you so much. I feel really aligned to you ideologically, and just the way that you approach things, and I feel like a real resonance to how you view this role and its importance and just all of those things. So this was a really great conversation. Thank you so much.
Likewise. I know it was like preaching to the choir here. I could just see us, same.
Right.
Same
I don't want somebody to be devil's advocates. That's what we just did. But
and with no motive, good. It's just that we've seen it. We've seen it all, and so we've seen the people with intentions towards that and how it ends up. And
we just know what works. Yeah, exactly. Let me save you some time. So anyway, well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you fitting us in. Yeah, this was really lovely. Reach is brought to you by Maven Recruiting Group, who specializes in placing executive assistants and support staff to the Bay Area's most prominent executives and companies. If you've enjoyed being part of our podcast community and are interested in becoming part of our candidate community, We're currently hiring for roles in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and Los Angeles. You can visit us at www.mavenrec.com to see some of the roles we're currently working on and to submit your resume.